Chapter 111, Scaled Demon Tribe. After the sword cultivator clone separated from the Scripture Storage Valleys group, he first took out the map and confirmed the direction before traveling on the flying sword. His goal was clear. After a night of sleep, his energy was restored. After flying for a few days, he arrived at the region where mortals like himself had gone on a journey to seek immortality. He even recognized the location where the Immortal Ascension Pavilion's convoy was stationed when they were attacked by the scaled demons. Continuing forward, he quickly found a river. After flying for a long time, a place resembling the redwood forest swamp appeared ahead. It was currently nighttime. The bright moonlight shone down, penetrating the layers of green leaves in the forest. Finally, only a small amount of light shone on the water surface, forming several spots of light. The flying sword retracted the flames and gradually lowered its height. Jiang Li controlled the sword cultivator clone to quickly enter the treetop silently. He stepped on the flying sword and agilely shuttled through the forest. In this kind of swamp terrain, the air quality was not much better, and everywhere was filled with an unpleasant stench of decay. However, as Jiang Li moved forward, a faint stench entered his nose. The indescribable smell gave him a familiar feeling. His main body was thousands of miles away. He touched the scar that had long disappeared on his shoulder and recalled a creature that looked like a human girl regardless of whether it was male or female. Scaled demon. This time, Jiang Li had two main reasons for letting out his sword cultivator clone. First, he would try to return to the Shu Mountain 5 Elements Peak and secretly learn the cultivation method manuals of the #1 sect in the Great Mountain region. Second, he would continue to investigate the matter of the spiritual root seed and attempt to expose this plot as a Shu Mountain disciple. After all, the betrayal of Elder Duan Shuang had already indicated that the spiritual root seed could control high-level cultivators. Then, there was very likely an extremely terrifying puppet network hidden behind this matter. If his main body was exposed, he might be rewarded by the sect and be in the limelight. However, at the same time, he might also face the threat of the parasitic cultivators hidden behind the scenes. The enemy was likely stronger than him and hidden in the dark. A backhanded sneak attack could end his transmigration life. So, after thinking about it, Jiang Li temporarily gave up on the intention of letting his main body take the risk. The gains simply did not make up for the losses. The sword cultivator clone's destination was the white-haired scaled demon tribe that year. Through Yan Hong's connection with the Immortal Ascension Hall, he successfully obtained information about the location of the scaled demon tribe. At that time, the way that the scaled demon spat out the spiritual root seed was different from all the cultivators Jiang Li had seen later on. Although its hair had turned white, it was not unconscious or on the verge of death. It could still survive for a long time. Moreover, when a group of scaled demons attacked the campsite at that time, besides rescuing their own kind, Jiang Li felt that they mostly wanted to retrieve the spiritual root seed. This meant that this scaled demon tribe might very well know some secrets about the spiritual root seed. At this moment, Jiang Li suddenly lowered his foot and raised it up, causing the tip of the flying sword under his foot to be raised up. It looked like a technical action resembling a skating board maneuver as he suddenly stopped. In front of him stood several clay spears planted in the ground. The spears were crudely made from sharp wooden sticks, but on the spears, they pierced through the air as if through a gourd, each having 7 or 8 heads. In fact, the top few heads were still relatively fresh. The remaining flesh and blood had not rotted completely. He stood on his flying sword and frowned as he stared at the wooden spears. The guts of these vile animals, how dare they? They treated the heads of humans as decorations and stuck them near their territory to showcase the strength and honor of their tribe. This kind of behavior instantly infuriated Jiang Li. They really were not of the same race. When Jiang Li was still a mortal back then, he even felt some pity when he saw those captured scaled demons. Now it seemed that he was really too naive and innocent. Previously, he had thought that their young girl's appearance was beautiful, so it was a pity to kill her directly. However, after thinking about it, the scaled demon's disguise as a beautiful human girl was clearly meant for capturing humans. These creatures that looked like young girls mainly ate humans as their diet. If not for the presence of a large number of human cultivators, who often slain demons and devils, limiting the range of activity of these other dangerous races, humanity would be in deep trouble already. Stepping on the flying sword, Jiang Li continued forward. In next to no time, a scaled demon tribe built on tree roots appeared before Jiang Li. A total of 77 scaled demons. Through the effects of the Bodhisattva Heart Sutra, Jiang Li could count the population of the tribe clearly without even opening his eyes. However, how could there be so few? At that time, the number of scaled demons that attacked the convoy was not limited to this number. Could it be that, because of the huge losses suffered by the other side a few months ago, the scaled demon tribe had fallen to such a state? Jiang Li did not act rashly. He stopped on a tree and quietly observed everything in the tribe ahead. It seems that these scaled demons are either weak or old, and there are also women and children. Jiang Li had specially borrowed the information about the scaled demons in the scripture storage valley. He was quite knowledgeable in this aspect and could identify them without spending much effort. The scaled demons in this tribe were either so old that they had lost their ability to survive alone, or were only equivalent to young scaled demons that were 5 or 6 years old. This was an abnormal tribe structure. Then where did those adult scaled demons go? Jiang Li held back the killing intent in his heart and continued to observe. After all, he had come here this time for the sake of obtaining information, and not purely to kill. He sat there quietly for a long time. The sound of flowing water came from nearby. Suddenly, the water surface broke open. A few scaled demons emerged from the water. They let out hoarse hissing sounds as if they were talking in the language of the scaled demons. Then, they dragged out the corpses of several horses and threw them onto the shore. The few young scaled demons did not come ashore with them. Instead, they plunged into the water again, leaving behind a series of bubbles that disappeared. Jiang Li became energetic. His ear approached the tree that was providing him shelter and pressed against the tree trunk. Through the tree trunk and the water's vibrations, he could clearly capture the world below the water surface, where the scaled demon tribe was located. So the tribe above is just a facade. The real scaled demon tribe is underwater. Due to the fact that scaled demons preyed on humans, it was very easy for them to be purged by human cultivators in the cultivation world. Against humans, they had the advantage in attributes and the special talent of the scaled demon song. They basically did not need to spend much effort to easily slaughter a village. But when faced with human cultivators, they became even more vulnerable than infants. Thus, they came up with the idea of 2 tribes, one open and one hidden. After the cultivators easily discovered and killed the elderly, women, and children of the tribe above, they would leave in satisfaction. As for the true underwater tribe, it would be preserved. After the cultivators left, they would continue to cruelly hunt the humans of the nearby villages. It seemed that their heads, which were very similar to humans, were not for nothing. They were indeed a race with intelligence and the ability to think. However, it seemed that no cultivator had specifically studied the language of the scaled demons. It seemed that it was not easy to obtain information through interrogation. His hearing captured the movements of the few scaled demons underwater. Following their movements, he quickly found a cave that was hidden underwater. Jiang Li was not in a hurry to attack. He relied on his ears to listen to the movement under the water. He sat quietly in the dark, blending into the shadow of a tree trunk. Even if a scaled demon swam past him, it would not discover him. At night, the scaled demons were originally active. In total, dozens of waves of scaled demons appeared, either going out to hunt or returning after hunting. A detailed map gradually formed in Jiang Li's heart, and he remembered all the underwater caves where these scaled demons entered and exited. The scaled demons were a type of humanoid amphibian. Although they could go ashore, they also needed their skin to remain moist. Therefore, they usually moved in the cold and moist night. They were typical night creatures. Finally, the night gradually receded, and the scaled demon's activity began to slow. When the sun rose, approximately 300 young scaled demons returned to the nest. Only then did Jiang Li stand up from the tree trunk and draw his flying sword burning rainbow. As a family, you should all die in an orderly manner. Chapter 112, Inverted Deity Statue. The sun rose and the temperature gradually rose. Even with the shade of the trees, the air still became hot. However, although it was only morning today, the temperature had already become higher than the usual noon. A scaled demon that was sleeping in a wooden nest could not stand it anymore. It crawled out of the nest and planned to go outside to take a breather or swim in the water to replenish its body's moisture. Hiss, 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 so fragrant. Hiss, hiss, what are you doing here? The scaled demon's body was slightly hunched and its muscles were weak. The human girl-like appearance was no longer attractive. It was clearly very old. After emerging from the nest, it saw an old scaled demon standing motionless in front of it. Furthermore, there was a burnt smell on its body. Following the smell, it noticed that a crimson sword was extending from the chest of the scaled demon in front of it. This old scaled demon was not standing in front of it, but rather hanging on the sword. Hiss! It tried to hiss in alarm, but the sword cut through its throat. Sizzle! The terrifying sound of burning iron touching flesh sounded in its body. Thick smoke instantly poured out of its windpipe and filled its nose. So fragrant! This was the scaled demon's final thought. Jiang Li's clone was at the Foundation establishment realm. How could he fail when dealing with a group of scaled demons who were only slightly stronger than wild beasts? He stood on the tree branch and did not move. He only formed hand seals and controlled the flying sword to move around the scaled demon tribe, easily killing all the creatures inside. In the end, they died completely. This group of scaled demons who were acting as sacrifices on the water did not even have the chance to scream. Not even a drop of blood flowed out. Next, his target was the group inside the water. Jiang Li thought for a moment, and still did not rely on his flying sword to attack forcefully. He took out a dozen unidentifiable talismans that could be bought from any place. This was a small help that his main body could give him without exposing himself. He first used the talisman paper to seal the other underwater caves. Then he flew into the water and swam into the last cave. This cave was just like what Jiang Li had detected with his hearing earlier. It was cleverly dug out into a U-shaped design. The outer part of the cave was completely covered in water, but inside it formed a dry pipe space. His clone did not have the ability to breathe underwater. Furthermore, under the water, not only was the power of the fire-flying sword greatly reduced, forcefully activating it might even cause damage. This situation was just right. Behind him, after using the talisman paper to form a simple 5 elements formation to seal the exit, Jiang Li entered through the passageway. The tunnel dug by the scaled demons was not wide. Ordinary people had to bend down or crawl forward. However, his clone did not have to do this. Jiang Li controlled him to lie on the flying sword and let the flying sword carry him forward. This way, he did not have to dirty his clothes, and his movements were even faster. The deeper he went, the stronger the stench became. Although this scaled demon tunnel did not extend in all directions, it was still rather complicated. Jiang Li was not a reincarnated groundhog, so he was a little clueless about this three-dimensional maze. He tried to follow using the smell, but all that did was torture his nose. However, hard work would always yield results. Under Jiang Li's repeated trial and error, he crawled deeper and deeper into the cave using the flying sword. Soon, after passing through another corner, dense hissing sounds resounded in the passage. Jiang Li was invigorated. He was not good at sniffing things, but spy hearing was his forte. Following the direction of the voice, he did not take any more detours. The passageway also became wider and wider. Finally, the hissing sound became louder and louder. At the end of the passage, Jiang Li saw a space that suddenly expanded with a flash of light. What are they doing? Jiang Li walked to the end of this passage and stuck his head out to look around. Hundreds of scaled demons crawled in front of something, constantly emitting rhythmic sounds. It sounds like the chanting of a prayer. One had to know that in terms of appearance, the scaled demons were all cute-looking human girls, and they were even naked. At first glance, it looked like a scene of 100 people moving together. If one did not know their true colors, their blood would rush somewhere. This group of scaled demons, were they offering sacrifices, or were they worshipping a totem? The intelligent races that had their own language in the tribal era were smart enough to generate theology. Jiang Li controlled his clone to sneak out. He covered the last scaled demon's mouth and snapped its neck. Then he carried the scaled demon as a shield and got closer to observe the situation in the underground cave. Gasp, what is that? The clone instinctively gasped in shock, but the stench of air that was sucked in made him use great willpower to barely hold back from exhaling. At the front of the hundreds of scaled demons, there was a very strange statue. It was obviously the target of worship for all the scaled demons. But a statue was a statue. Why was it strange to him? This was because the statue was not like the normal statue. The head was facing the bottom. The statue was attached to the ceiling of the cave with its head facing down. It was as if gravity acted in the opposite direction on it. Jiang Li still wanted to see it more clearly, but from this distance, he could not decipher more details. At this moment, at the front of the scaled demons, an obviously much taller scaled demon roared. The cave immediately fell silent. Even Jiang Li's clone, who was hiding behind the scaled demon's corpse, revealed a slightly surprised expression. That scaled demon actually had a cultivation base. Furthermore, sensing that aura, the scaled demon's cultivation was even at the Foundation establishment realm. Wait a moment. It was fine if he did not pay attention. However, once he did, he realized that there were more than 10 scaled demons standing at the front of this group. They were either strong or weak, but all had spiritual chi fluctuations. They did not hide it at all. Instead, they worked hard to stir their spiritual chi to reveal themselves to the scaled demon above. Jiang Li was shocked. Although scaled demons were called demons, in the cultivation world, they were generally treated as beasts with slight intelligence. This was because, although the scaled demon had some talent, it was actually unable to absorb spiritual chi to cultivate like spiritual root cultivators and demon beasts. However, not only could that scaled demon cultivate, it had even reached the Foundation establishment realm. Could this be the effect of the spiritual root seed? The spiritual root seed could allow ordinary mortals to obtain spiritual roots, so it was not strange for the scaled demon to obtain the talent to cultivate. But what did the spiritual root seed have to do with the inverted statue that the scaled demons were worshipping? Just as Jiang Li was filled with thoughts, 2 scaled demons stood up from the scaled demons. A look of honor appeared on their human-like faces. They walked forward and knelt in front of the tall scaled demon. 2 wooden bowls were placed in front of them. After that, it was a familiar scene that Jiang Li had seen before. The black hair of the 2 scaled demons turned white from the end and quickly spread to the roots. The aura on their bodies also began to weaken rapidly. The spiritual chi fluctuation that could still be vaguely sensed quickly disappeared. Without spending much effort, their black hair turned snow white, and 2 spiritual root seeds were spat out from their mouths and landed in their wooden bowls. Chapter 113, Source. The 2 seeds rolled in the wooden bowl, but the 2 scaled demons did not fall to the ground. They only looked a little weak. After spitting out the spiritual root seeds, they knelt on the ground and held the wooden bowl in their hands above their heads. It seemed that they were going to prostrate themselves and offer their spiritual root seeds. The taller scaled demon reached out and grabbed the 2 seeds before ignoring the 2 white-haired scaled demons. It walked to the inverted statue and hissed softly. It was unknown if it was chanting some scaled demon version of an incantation or just making sounds aimlessly. However, the change occurred very quickly. Jiang Li noticed that the mouth of the statue actually opened slightly. The two spiritual root seeds floated up and directly entered the statue's mouth. This was a statue that could actually eat. The moment the spiritual root seed entered its mouth, the statue immediately glowed slightly. Soon, a vine grew from the statue and stopped in front of the tall scaled demon. Then, two cherry-sized fruits grew out at a speed visible to the naked eye. Jiang Li was enlightened. It was no wonder his spiritual root seed showed no signs of growing. It turned out that the method he used was wrong. After the tall scaled demon bowed at the statue, it stood up again and reached out to pluck a fruit to eat. However, at this moment, a red light suddenly appeared in the scaled demon's dark cave. The flying sword, burning rainbow, instantly arrived. In the blink of an eye, it had already flown in front of the scaled demon. Almost instantly, a turbid water screen suddenly appeared and blocked the flying sword. The Foundation establishment scaled demon roared and was about to give the order to kill the invading enemy. Pew! However, the layer of water and the scaled demon's bodies were instantly pierced by the scorching light, and it did not have the slightest defensive effect. No matter what, Shu mountain sword cultivators were reputable existences in the Great Mountain region. Even if their ordinary sword cultivators were not the strongest among their peers, they were definitely ranked first or second among others of the same realm. Especially in terms of attack power, very few cultivators could match them. With the appearance of his flying sword, even the benevolent travel temple's orthodox body cultivators would have to consider whether they could withstand it. This scaled demon did not have any legacy and did not know any spell techniques. It only had an incomplete chi refinement technique and relied on its own clansmen to barely reach the Foundation establishment realm. If Jiang Li was not wrong, the layer of water screen earlier was clearly a barrier forcefully condensed from muddy spiritual chi. In terms of defense, it was slightly better than nothing. It was estimated that any powerful chi refinement realm sect disciple could easily take it down. If Jiang Li's flying sword could still be blocked by it, there would be no need for him to cultivate anymore. He should just find a branch to hang himself and end this miserable life. After stabbing through the scaled demon, the flying sword did not stop. The sword glowed red and turned into a stream of light that swam through the cave at high speed, easily reaping lives. Since he had already achieved his goal, Jiang Li no longer needed to hide. He stood up straight and walked towards the statue not far away. Every step he took, the flying sword would reap the lives of more than 10 scaled demons. Some scaled demons noticed the eye-catching Jiang Li, and they roared as they intended to pounce forward. Unfortunately, the speed of the red stream of light was 10 or 100 times faster than them. It streaked across space and left charred holes in the scaled demons. When Jiang Li walked to the side of the Foundation establishment scaled demon, there were already few living beings in the entire scaled demon cave. He used his foot to flip over the Foundation establishment scaled demon and kicked the scaled demon's lower jaw, breaking it. Its jaw dropped, revealing a row of sharp teeth that were as sharp as steel needles. Jiang Li had specially weakened the might of the earlier sword strike, and it did not hit the vital parts. Only then did it barely manage to temporarily survive. As for why he left it alive, the reason was quite obvious. A bunch of waste pills were stuffed into its mouth. The heavily injured scaled demon quickly twisted and struggled violently. Its long black hair also quickly turned white. Jiang Li checked the other scaled demons with cultivation levels. Unfortunately, their vitality was not strong enough, and only 3 survived. After going through the procedures, Jiang Li washed the 4 seeds that were slightly disgusting due to the vomit. After wrapping them with cloth, he stuffed them into his arms. He had a feeling that these spiritual root seeds would be of great help to him in the future. After clearing the demon nest, Jiang Li did not find anything of interest that these poor scaled demons had. After walking around and killing many of the escapees that lived in other caves, Jiang Li stood in front of the inverted deity statue. Flying sword burning rainbow floated quietly beside him. Flames surrounded the sword, illuminating everything around him. Only when Jiang Li approached did he discover that the statue was actually a strange, inverted tree. The roots of the monstrous tree dug deep into the top of the cavern, supporting it in such a manner that it could turn upside down for a long time. The tree's body completely revealed the image of a figure sitting cross-legged. From his movements to his expression, it was extremely beautiful and magical. There was even a canopy of dark green leaves above the inverted statue, making it look solemn. However, there was no doubt that this was indeed a living tree. Jiang Li, who had a wood attribute spiritual root, was confident that he would not be wrong about this. The vine with 2 fruits grew from the top of the reverse statue. Jiang Li thought for a moment before reaching out to pluck the 2 fruits. The black-red fruit had an alluring color, and the rich fragrance was mouth-watering. Clearly, this fruit was the same as the spiritual root seed. Haha, this treasure is for those who are fated to obtain it. It seems that my luck has been very good recently. I'm going to eat it. He picked up the fruit and was about to stuff it into his mouth. The sweet smell made the spiritual qi in his clone's body stir. His instinct told Jiang Li that as long as he ate this fruit, his cultivation would rise exponentially. However, just as the fruit was about to fall into his mouth, he stopped. I'm not stupid. Of course I can't actually eat this. Even if he wanted to eat it, he had to completely control this strange tree. At that time, he might be able to enjoy this spiritual fruit that had absorbed the cultivation essence of these creatures. Jiang Li looked at the strange tree that had grown into a statue. There was definitely something wrong with this inverted divine tree. It could eat the spiritual root seed and grow the same number of fruits. This was the only method Jiang Li had discovered to date to use the spiritual root seed. After eating the fruit, he should be able to obtain a portion of the cultivation that the previous person lost. Perhaps this strange tree was the source of the spiritual root seed, or at least one of the sources. After all, in the Southern Seal Kingdom, there was a terrifying existence that could easily release more than 2,000 spiritual root seeds. As for the strange tree in front of him, it only released a dozen spiritual root seeds to carefully plant in the scaled demon tribe. In the past, when the Immortal Ascension Pavilion caught the owner of a spiritual root seed, these scaled demons had to take a huge risk to attack the convoy in order to retrieve the spiritual root seed. From the looks of it, there should be more than one source of the spiritual root seed. Moreover, the difference in strength was extremely great. In addition, from the information he had gathered, the spiritual root seeds were actually similar to parasitic entities that could not live on their own. They were like worker bees in a swarm. They did not possess reproduction ability and existed only as tools and the medium to obtain energy. Its function was to take root in the biological body and guide them in their cultivation. Then, it would seize all the cultivation gains and send it back to the mother tree. Therefore, since spiritual roots were not a method of reproduction, how could 2 strange trees that had appeared in the Great Mountain reproduce? It was very likely that they did not have the ability to do so. Perhaps the strange tree in front of Jiang Li was the reproduction of a stronger existence. However, this inverted growth seemed to go against plant instincts. What was the source of this plant? Chapter 114, Senior Sister's Request. In short, no matter what was behind this strange tree, since it was in his hands, Jiang Li had to obtain it. However, it was a pity that his clone did not have a storage artifact. Jiang Li scratched his head and felt a headache coming on. It was impossible for the clone to carry the tree around. The speed at which his body rode the dragon imprisoning lock was far inferior to the flying sword. It would probably take him at least half a month to retrieve it personally. If the clone left, would the tree immediately open its eyes and flee? After all, the mouth on this statue was not a decoration. What if the legs could also move? There were all kinds of strange things in the cultivation world. This kind of possibility was indeed likely. After thinking about it, Jiang Li formed hand seals and controlled the flying sword to quickly dance on the top of the cave, carving out lines. From time to time, he would produce a spirit talisman and paste it around the area. Soon, using the talismans as the array core, he carved out a simple fire attribute trapping array on the ceiling. 3 more spirit stones were placed as the energy source as the entire array formation immediately emitted a faint red light. To be safe, his clone did not leave. Instead, he sat down cross-legged and began cultivating. Looking at the temporary hideout of the Scripture Storage Valley's demon-vanquishing hall, 1,000 miles away. Jiang Li's main body woke up from his cultivation. Because he and senior sister Liu Mulan were usually on night shift, the day was when he cultivated qi refinement. He let out a long sigh. Not long ago, his ghostwood art had already broken through to the 6th level. Under the endless flow of spiritual qi, he almost did not feel any bottleneck, so he naturally crossed it. As for the next level of the ghostwood art, he would be at the late-stage qi refinement realm after reaching it. Jiang Li scratched his head. He realized that his previous calculations were wrong. Previously, using the speed at which he refined the spiritual qi in the 4th level of the ghostwood art, he estimated that he would need about 2 years to reach the peak of the qi refinement realm and break through to the foundation establishment realm. However, the problem was, could the refinement speed of the 4th level of the qi refinement realm be the same as the refinement speed of the 6th level? Obviously not. The higher his cultivation level, the stronger his cultivation method was. Although the difficulty of cultivating continued to increase, the speed at which he absorbed and refined spiritual qi would only become faster and faster. "My good master, I am happy for you. What a genius disciple you have taken in," Jiang Li muttered to himself while the smile on his face was impossible to conceal. Of course, he was purely happy for the sake of his master. However, what excuse should he use to ask senior sister if he wanted to take leave? He scratched his head, looking troubled again. "What, you're saying you want to go out alone to train?" A roar sounded from Senior Liu's room. Their master usually spoke so slowly and leisurely. Who knew where this senior sister Liu had learned how to roar? "Senior sister Mulan, listen to me. I did this because I listened to master's arrangements." Jiang Li said a few words that elder he used to scare him when he was bragging earlier. Without saying a word, he took off his shirt, revealing his strong muscles and the blood tattoo on his back that had begun to dim. How long have you been out of the sect for? Is this blood tattoo going to be exhausted already?" Senior sister Liu Mulan was not shy. After all, she was also a body cultivator and had often seen her fellow disciples revealing their muscles. She did not have much of a reaction to this scene. She came forward to touch the blood tattoo on Jiang Li's body, feeling extremely surprised. The other disciples under Elder He, including her, would need at least 5 months to consume a beast blood tattoo during the qi refinement realm. However, this Jiang Li, it had only been half a month, and the blood tattoo was about to disappear again. This speed was really exaggerated. Although the consumption of the blood tattoo was related to the intensity of his usual combat strength cultivation. But, all right, the combat strength of this junior brother of hers was indeed ridiculous, and was not inferior to that of a foundation establishment cultivator. Now, he even started to spar with her from time to time. This kind of usage speed was considered normal. However, in comparison, it was demoralizing. Senior sister Liu Mulan felt depressed. That won't do either. Although master does have this rule, that depends on the situation. How long have you been in the sect? Your cultivation is only at the mid-stage. You don't have any experience surviving alone in the outside world. You need to know that in the wild, there won't be any demon beasts that will fight you fairly. You might even be bitten to death by any poisonous insect on the way. Do you know how far away this place is from the sect? There are countless demon beasts and dangers along the way. If you go out, you're courting death. Senior sister Liu Mulan naturally would not deny Jiang Li's strength and talent. But geniuses needed more protection, right? There were so many mediocre people who would care about their lives. With Jiang Li's cultivation speed, wouldn't it be good for him to stay in a safe place and cultivate until he reached the core formation realm? The rule that he mentioned was indeed set by Elder He. The first 3 materials for the beast blood diagram were personally selected for them by Elder He. He captured the demon beasts back to the sect and made them engage in one-on-one combat while being watched over. This was undoubtedly much safer than suddenly fighting an enemy that appeared in the wild at any time. But sooner or later, the young bird would have to flap its wings and fly into the sky. Elder He could not shield them forever. Therefore, there was this rule. From the 4th beast blood tattoo, Elder He would no longer provide demon beasts. Disciples had to head to the wilderness forest on their own to find and defeat their targets to obtain the beast blood materials to become stronger in the future. This rule was very reasonable and diligent. It could be seen that Elder He held great expectations for them. However, other disciples would use up 3 beast blood tattoos usually after cultivating a year or 2. At that time, they would be experienced and prepared. But in Jiang Li's case, how long had it been? Senior sister, don't worry, I'll be fine. Don't you know how powerful I am? Jiang Li tried to coax her, but his senior sister was unmoved. How strong are you? Are you stronger than me? I'm not even completely confident that I can return to the sect by myself, so don't even think about it. Liu Mulan's senior sister's tone was firm at first, but when she saw Jiang Li's expression, she seemed to have thought of something and suddenly added, "Unless you can defeat me." Senior sister Liu Mulan actually proposed such a condition to Jiang Li. Jiang Li was stunned. As fellow body cultivators, everyone's combat methods were similar. At most, they focused on different points, but in essence, they relied on their basic attributes. However, senior sister Liu Mulan was not weak in the foundation establishment realm. Her cultivation level was much higher than Jiang Li's, and her attributes were firmly above his in all aspects. If they fought, he would feel terrible, and his chances of winning would be slim. Right now, he had an urge to sacrifice his body and make his senior sister change her mind. Jiang Li scratched his head and pondered bitterly for a long time before he suddenly thought of something. After weighing the pros and cons for a moment, he decided. Senior sister, if I want to live outside, I actually don't have to defeat all the demon beasts, right? If I can run fast, I can escape, isn't that right? Let's have a competition. We'll compete in speed. If you can capture me, senior sister, I'll cultivate obediently and wait for the next flying ship. But if I win and you can't capture me, how about you let me gain some experience? I promise I won't go too far and I'll come back immediately if there's any danger. Chapter 115. What kind of monster is he? Oh, you want to compete with me in speed? Senior sister Liu Mulan was extremely surprised. This junior brother of hers actually wanted to challenge her with his shortcomings. Jiang Li's body refinement specialized in strength. She had long figured this out during the many sparring sessions. As for her, Liu Mulan, she was a body cultivator with an agility attribute. Every time, she could easily suppress Jiang Li in terms of speed and movement technique. Although Jiang Li's 3rd beast blood tattoo used a vine-tailed leopard that leaned towards speed, it was definitely not so easy to make up for the gap between them. Yes, senior sister, how about letting me try? Jiang Li was extremely persistent. That divine statue tree should have a great origin. He had a wood attribute spiritual root to begin with. If nothing unexpected happened, that thing should be extremely important to him. It was impossible for him to give up because of this obstruction. Even if senior sister Liu refused, he would still find an opportunity to slip out. On the other hand, Liu Mulan was puzzled in her heart. This junior brother of hers was not a fool. Why would he suggest such a sure-lose competition? Could it be that he was plotting something? However, after thinking about it, senior sister Liu Mulan could not think of any way to let Jiang Li defeat her. Therefore, she finally agreed. Sure, I can give you this chance, but you can't use medicinal pills or talismans. She added this condition as a way to stop Jiang Li from cheating in the end. However, Jiang Li's expression did not change in the slightest as he agreed with a smile. Since there was nothing else to do, Liu Mulan and Jiang Li walked out of the temporary base. Looking at the mountain opposite, Liu Mulan took out a spear from somewhere and aimed it at the mountain top. In an instant, her arm swelled up and she quickly ran a few steps forward. Swoosh! A tearing sound resounded in the air as the spear flew out from his hand and shot into the sky. After flying in a large arc, it stabbed into the mountaintop opposite him. At that distance, even with Jiang Li's good vision, he could only see a black dot. I'll let you run for 5 breaths before I chase after you. If I capture you, you lose. If you pull out that spear before I capture you, you win. Remember, you're not allowed to fly. Jiang Li nodded without any objections. With his dragon imprisoning lock, the speed at which he flew might not necessarily be faster than his full speed. However, right when senior sister Liu Mulan was about to shout, Jiang Li hurriedly stopped her. Wait, senior sister. Let me prepare for a while. Jiang Li looked at the spear on the opposite mountaintop and precisely adjusted his direction to face his target. 5 seconds later, a negative status was quietly removed from his status bar. After that, a gust of wind spread out from beneath Jiang Li's feet. In his legs, a powerful force awakened from its slumber. Fortunately, he did not fly out directly. All right, senior sister, you can begin. Liu Mulan was speechless. What difference was there between preparing and not preparing? She casually threw out 2 rocks in succession. While flying, the rocks behind caught up to the rocks in front. The 2 rocks collided and exploded with a bang. This meant that the competition had begun. Boom! Almost at the same time that the rock exploded, there was an explosion where Jiang Li was. It was as if he had been hit by a meteorite on the ground, causing dust to rise high. By the time Liu Mulan waved her hand to blow away the dust, Jiang Li's figure had already disappeared. Liu Mulan looked down the mountain path and her pupils immediately constricted. She saw a shadow flying down the mountain at an exaggerated speed. The dust that was stirred up could not even keep up with his speed. After he ran for a while, it slowly spread out. What speed was this? Senior sister Liu Mulan was shocked. How could she still care about the rules she had set with Jiang Li? She did not care if it was for 5 breaths of time or a few breaths of time. She immediately activated her movement technique and chased after Jiang Li. However, no matter how she utilized her movement technique, not only did the distance between her and Jiang Li not shrink, it instead continued to widen. Jiang Li's speed was actually faster than hers. It was not just a little bit faster. This was very ridiculous. Between the 2 of them, who was at the foundation establishment realm and who was at the chi refinement realm? Master, oh master, what kind of monster did you take in? There were no spectators in their impromptu competition this time, and the route was also decided at the last minute. In fact, it was just going down the mountain where the sect's temporary base was located, and running to the mountain where the spear was stabbed was the end. After Jiang Li unsealed his speed, he left everyone else in the dust. On the way down the mountain in the first half, he went very smoothly. This was because a sect had set up camp and cleaned it up in advance. The mountain path down the mountain was also straight, and it was relatively wide and flat. However, in the latter half of the journey, his speed clearly slowed down. The uneven rocks and trees that grew everywhere were annoying to him. If not for his clone helping him practice his movement technique during this period of time, he would have long fallen out. He crossed his arms and lowered his shoulders, putting on the mountain-crushing scriptures posture. When he encountered a tree, he collided with a tree, and when he encountered a rock, he shattered the rock. He slammed into all the obstacles until they were gone. However, his speed was still very fast. In the end, Jiang Li crossed the steep slope and arrived at the peak of the target with a body covered in splinters. Stop, too far. Jiang Li's figure brushed past the spear that was stabbed into the ground. He stumbled forward for dozens of meters before barely stopping. He was still far from being able to perfectly control his full speed. Slap, slap. 2 talismans were slapped onto his thighs. The power of the talismans spread out, and the restless power of the armored horse divine travel was suppressed once again. 5 seconds later, Jiang Li tore off the talisman papers, ran to the spear, and pulled out the spear that was half buried in the ground. At this moment, another figure climbed up the mountaintop. It was senior sister Liu Mulan who had arrived late. Senior sister, I won this time. Jiang Li waved the spear in his hand while his smile remained unchanged. He did not have the feeling of superiority as a victor, and it did not cause others to feel the slightest discomfort. Your speed is forget it, you win. Senior sister Liu was extremely depressed in her heart. She really wanted to ask Jiang Li about his speed, but when she spoke, she took into account that this was Jiang Li's secret and held back. Furthermore, even if she managed to find out, so what? She felt that she was asking to be humiliated. Jiang Li did not have any talismans on his body, and he did not show any side effects of exhaustion after the incident. This speed should indeed be the strength that Jiang Li had grasped, but it was concealed during normal times because he was unable to grasp it. This could be seen from the destruction Jiang Li caused along the way. Some cultivators even had to sacrifice their lives for the sake of greater strength, while some cultivators had to take the initiative to restrict their own speed. The gap between people was sometimes even greater than the difference between a man and a pig. Come with me. Since you've won, I can't stop you anymore. However, you're going out alone to train. There are some things I have to explain to you. Liu Mulan rode a flying disc back to the temporary base. Jiang Li also activated the dragon imprisoning lock on his waist and followed his senior sister. It had to be said that the feeling of using the dragon imprisoning lock to fly was still slightly inferior to riding on a sword. Chapter 116. This thing has an affinity with me. While flying in the air, senior sister Liu told him many things to take note of when going out. Some he had heard of when he was in the outer sect cultivation hall, while others were new stuff that he had heard for the first time. He was still a newbie without much experience. With someone teaching him kindly, he naturally enjoyed learning. When she arrived at the encampment, the senior sister returned to her room and rummaged through it. This was the trouble with not having a storage artifact. All the cultivators were like squirrels. They would hide all the stuff that they found inconvenient to bring everywhere. In the end, senior sister Liu Mulan gave him a few bottles of powdered medicinal pills powder and pulled him along to carefully explain the usage method before finally letting him go. Applied smell erasing powder. Added status, body smell erased. Body smell erased. Body smell reduced by 95%. Duration 2 hours minus plus. Applied insect repellent powder. Added status, repel insects. Repel insects drives away small insects. Duration 2 hours minus plus. Removing his body smell could allow him to hide his tracks better in the wilderness, greatly increasing his safety. Repelling insects was essential for survival in the wilderness. Otherwise, in the wilderness, those insects could really torture a person to death. After applying these 2 types of powder on his body, Jiang Li obtained 2 very practical statuses for the wilderness. After bidding farewell to his senior sister, he descended the mountain and headed into the distance. Jiang Li did not fly directly in the sky. Instead, he relied on his legs' movement techniques to run just like his clone had. Through gradually reducing the restrictions of the talisman paper and the life-locking needles, he could slowly increase his speed and gradually adapt. This time, he did not choose to smash through the trees along the way. Instead, he treated the complicated jungle terrain as the best obstacle course. He moved around and constantly practiced adapting. Thus, he practiced for 7 days and sprinted all the way. After an unknown period of time, under a tree in the forest, an ape carrying vines landed here. It scratched its hairless bottom, then puffed up its chest and began watering the trees. The criteria for choosing a mate in this group was a little strange. Those female apes did not like shiny fur or strong muscles, but they had a penchant for males with high urine levels. Among their species, the powerful ape was over 3 meters tall, but it could only reach 1.5 meters. It puffed up its chest and immediately stood up. Then, it saw that the water line it created was getting higher and higher. Before the ape could get excited, when did a coffin appear under its feet? Wuxia. The silly monkey was shocked by the coffin that suddenly came out of the ground. It screamed and ran far away. After a moment, the coffin lid automatically slid to the side, and Jiang Li walked out from within. He stretched his back and felt refreshed. This was the third time he had woken up after coming out. He had been traveling for a long time. Fortunately, because his clothes were usually worn out quickly, he prepared many disciple clothes in advance and placed them in the yin burial coffin. After often changing his clothes, his body did not stink. His journey here was rather peaceful. The smell of his body was very faint, and he never stopped to rush along the way. When some powerful demon beasts discovered that there was a human here, he had already run for an unknown distance. This was far from what he imagined. He did not encounter a demon every few steps along the way. On the way, he continuously used appraisal to raise his appraisal skill by a small level. At the same time, he also obtained quite a number of spiritual materials and spiritual herbs. In terms of spirit stones, he could earn about 100. However, as an inner sect disciple, his monthly allowance was more than 100 spirit stones. This bit of hard-earned money was better than nothing. He sensed that the distance between him and his clone was not far. Jiang Li calculated the distance and speed. He should be able to reach it by today. After putting away the coffin, Jiang Li's figure vanished like the wind again. On the other side, the clone also opened his eyes. After glancing at the strange statue tree above him, he got up and walked out. As soon as the clone left, 2 vines stretched out from the statue tree. Bang, bang, bang. 2 sparks arose on the fire attribute array, burning back the vines that wanted to create trouble. During the period when Jiang Li rushed over, this strange tree had been stirring up trouble. However, its combat ability was quite limited. It could only grow some vines and roots to wrap people up. Moreover, the speed was not very fast. After more than 10 were cut down by the flying sword, it did not dare to act rashly in front of the clone. However, in order to maintain the independence of his main body and clone, Jiang Li had to try his best to prevent both sides from appearing at the same time or even being too close. Therefore, his clone had to leave first. Once the clone left, it wanted to come out again. However, before leaving, the clone had set up 5 layers of array formations around the strange tree. It was impossible for it to break through in a day. When Jiang Li's main body found the location of the scaled demon tribe, the exposed scaled demon corpses had already been eaten by the wild beasts in the forest. He sank into the water and skillfully found the entrance to the nest. At this time, the smell of the scaled demon's cave was much better than before. In order to prevent himself from dying of stench, his clone had burned all the scaled demon corpses in the cave to ashes with his spirit fire. After more than 20 days, even if he was in the underground cave, the smell had already dissipated quite a bit. Jiang Li followed the path in his memories and quickly found the spacious stone room. The strange tree was still unwilling to give up. However, compared to the beginning, the vines that grew out were thin, dry, and obviously malnourished. It looked a little pitiful. "Let me see what you really are." Jiang Li's eyes lit up. He immediately used appraisal. His clone was unable to use appraisal, and his curiosity towards this thing had tortured Jiang Li for a long time. Now, he could finally take a look. Name: Spiritual Root Branch. Type: Plant. Grade: Unknown. Root status: Inverse gravity. Nutrition source: Subsidiary parasite. Note from an unknown land. Spiritual root branch, spiritual root seed. Jiang Li's eyes flickered with an inexplicable light as he repeated these 2 words softly. Apart from the cultivation talent of cultivators, what else could the word spiritual root mean? Spiritual root of heaven and earth, connate spiritual root. Jiang Li suddenly recalled a passage written by his predecessor in the ghost wood art, and some myths and legends from his previous life. Immortal peach, ginseng fruit, yellow core tree, fusing tree, moon laurel tree, bitter bamboo, calabash vine. In his previous life, these natural plants in the primordial world of ancient mythologies were called spiritual roots. Among them, there were 3,600 immortal peaches. They were divided into 3 grades: high, medium, and low. They were all reproductive sub-branches of the connate immortal peach. It could be seen that the spiritual root indeed had such a phenomenon. As for the strange tree in front of him that had reversed gravity, it was appraised as a spiritual root branch. But as to which spiritual root it was, there were still 2 questions unanswered. Could it be that its source was also a connate spiritual root? Jiang Li was excited. Since the ancient times, there had been no signs of immortals or Buddhas. He had originally thought that all the treasures had been reduced to ashes in the Great Calamity. He did not expect that such a thing would still exist. Although the strange tree in front of him was quite pitifully weak, it was only because it had unfortunately fallen into the hands of a group of scaled demons. The fact that it was a spiritual root branch still meant that it was undoubtedly very powerful. This point could be discovered just by looking at the characteristics of the spiritual root seed. Oh no, when the appraisal skill appraised that seed, the information displayed was name, spiritual root seed. Now, it seemed that the full name of these seeds should be called the seed of the spiritual root branch. Spiritual roots were spiritual roots. In ancient times, they were things that only the immortal and Buddhist sects could master. If he could figure out the secret of this spiritual root branch, it would not be impossible for him to walk on his own path to the great Tao. Jiang Li stepped forward. The more he looked at the spiritual root branch in front of him, the more he liked it. Even the divine statue that had sprouted from the tree trunk became delicate in his eyes. Swoosh! With a thought, the dragon imprisoning lock flew out from his waist and bound the spiritual root branch. This thing has an affinity with me. Chapter 117, Female Bird Seeking Revenge. Jiang Li's dragon imprisoning lock was a chain that had once bound the dragon race. If it was just the toughness of the chain, it was absolutely impossible to trap a dragon. The characteristics of the dragon imprisoning lock were naturally on that single word, imprisoning. After being bound by the dragon imprisoning lock, it would have a strong suppression effect on the target. Regardless of whether it was spiritual qi cultivation or physical strength, once they were locked up by the dragon imprisoning lock, most of their strength would be sealed. They would be powerless to resist. When Elder He had just given this artifact to Jiang Li, due to the wear and tear of time, the spiritual qi within the dragon imprisoning lock had already dispersed completely. Apart from being sturdy, it was practically useless. However, later on, Jiang Li made a mistake and swallowed a drop of high-grade spirit stone spiritual liquid, obtaining a spiritual qi infusion status that was beyond his current tolerance level. In order to share the burden of the surplus spiritual qi, he used an endless supply of high-grade spiritual qi to refine it every day. This dragon imprisoning lock gradually recovered some of its former power. The spiritual root before him was still lacking in strength. After being bound by the dragon imprisoning lock, it immediately stopped moving. Jiang Li did not forcefully pull it away. If he were to break this spiritual root, he would be the one feeling heartache. Clenching his fists, he suddenly jumped up and smashed into the mountain rock above him. How exaggerated was Jiang Li's strength at this moment. As a fist smashed down, large chunks of rock shattered and rolled down. However, this was far from the end. He surrounded the spiritual root and punched the top of the cave. Jiang Li was actually planning to dig out this strange tree from the rocks. In the sect, Jiang Li was very familiar with such matters. He only spent more than an hour to completely dig out the root structure with a radius of only 3 meters, along with the rocks. After throwing out the yin burial coffin, the coffin's mouth quickly enlarged and actually stuffed such a huge tree into the coffin. Jiang Li also flipped over and entered the coffin space. He was afraid that his spiritual root would accidentally drop into the yin zombie's blood. It would be a sin if it got soaked. However, after entering, he realized that his worries were completely unnecessary. The inverted property of the spiritual root was still present. He saw that the black and red yin corpse blood sank to the bottom. The spiritual root branch, on the other hand, seemed to have really reversed gravity as it steadily landed on the ceiling of the coffin. This saved him a lot of trouble. With a wave of his hand, Jiang Li put away the dragon imprisoning lock. However, he threw out a few spirit talismans and stuck them onto the tree, restricting it. Before he could completely master this spiritual root branch, Jiang Li did not plan to give it too good of a treatment, as it would be easy for an accident to happen. However, with the rich spiritual qi environment inside the coffin, it should not starve to death. After leaving the cave, Jiang Li formed hand seals and pointed forward. The array formation set up by the sword cultivator clone shattered with a bang. The scaled demon lair, which was already full of cracks from Jiang Li's violent fists, finally could not endure it and completely collapsed, burying everything that had happened in the past underground. Jiang Li tapped his feet lightly and started moving towards the direction of the sect again. The tattoo on his back had really vanished completely this time, and he could already condense a new blood tattoo. Shrika. On the sword cultivator clone's side, he was flying in the direction he came from calmly. However, after flying for half a day, a familiar cry sounded from afar. Jiang Li's parallel mind was shocked. Wasn't the golden-winged condor already dead? The corpse had already been distributed among the people in the scripture storage valley. How could it still cause trouble? Jiang Li immediately retracted the fluctuation of his flying sword and quickly descended to the ground. Soon, he entered the forest below to temporarily dodge. Shrika. Another similar cry sounded. This time, the sound was much louder than before. Clearly, the distance was quickly closing. However, Jiang Li, who had extremely sharp ears, noticed a trace of abnormality. This voice was different from the previous one. Wait a minute, didn't the sect's eldest senior brother Chu Yongxuan tell him before? Golden-winged condors generally live together as a pair of male and female. At that time, it was only a male bird that they had killed. In other words, this was the female bird. Was it here to seek revenge? He could not be that unlucky. As Jiang Li converged his aura, he held the flying sword in his hand tightly. He focused his mind and slowed his heartbeat as he adjusted his condition. Ever since the awakening of his sword heart that day, his parallel mind had been trying to recover that feeling. After sitting cross-legged for more than 20 days, he finally made some progress. Although it required a lot of preparation time and the duration was very short, he could indeed enter the sword heart state steadily. As long as he was given a little more time, when that condor came over, his clone would be able to ruthlessly attack it with burning rainbow. Soon, the sound of something tearing through the air could be heard. Jiang Li was stunned. He raised his head and looked up through the treetops, only to see green, blue, gold, and brown flying swords streak through the sky. A few breaths later, another large bird flapped its wings and chased closely behind. It was a golden-winged condor that was even larger than Jiang Li had seen previously. It was currently chasing after 4 sword cultivators. It was not after him. Jiang Li rejoiced in his heart, however, who was so unlucky as to bump into a female bird who had lost her mate. He pushed aside the leaves and looked at the 2 parties chasing after him. However, when he saw the 4 sword lights that were fleeing ahead, he felt that they looked familiar. Senior sister, our sword speed isn't fast enough. If this continues, we'll definitely be caught up. The sword cultivator on the green wood attribute flying sword spoke. He was the youngest among the 4 with the lowest cultivation level. At this moment, he could not hold on anymore. Leading them was a water attribute female sword cultivator. Her pitch-black hair was mixed with traces of ice blue, making her look mysterious and cold. "You guys leave first. I'll go stop that beast." The water attribute female cultivator glanced at the pursuing condor. After saying this, the flying sword beneath her suddenly slowed down. She turned around and faced the incoming bird. After learning from the disciple of the scripture storage valley that senior brother Tang Yan was not dead, she went down the mountain to look for her senior brother. She felt that she was the cause of this incident and could not implicate her companions. Moreover, she was still the senior sister, so she should take responsibility for this. However, a voice came from beside her. It was the metal attribute sword cultivator who said, "Senior sister, you're wrong. I'm the fastest on my sword and I'm even more confident in escaping. This kind of mission should be given to me, right?" From the other side, another voice spoke. "No, no, no. My Stardust sword is best at resisting enemies. In terms of delaying enemies, I'm the best. I don't know anything, but if my senior brothers and sisters don't leave, I won't leave either." The last wood attribute sword cultivator answered. The female cultivator on the ice-blue flying sword looked around. A helpless smile appeared in front of her. It turned out that she had planned to sacrifice herself and suddenly slowed down. The three companions beside her also stayed behind without any hesitation. "You, all right. Then let's have another battle with that beast and let it see the might of the Shu Mountain sword cultivators." The four of them immediately regrouped. The flying sword beneath their feet glowed brightly as they charged at golden-winged condor. Shrika! The golden-winged condor lunged forward with its sharp claws. The four sword lights dispersed in four directions at the same time, causing the pair of huge claws that could crush rocks to miss. The condor had limited intelligence and did not know which direction to pursue for the time being. As a result, it lost the initiative. After the four sword cultivators rushed out a distance in the opposite direction, they gathered together again. In the next moment, the flying swords in their hands turned into four streaks of light that flew out of their hands. They circled around each other and attacked the condor. This was the five-element sword formation that they had tempered 1,000 times. However, the five elements were missing fire, so its power was greatly reduced. Swoosh! However, at this moment, a crimson stream of light rose from the forest below and chased after the four flying swords at an extremely fast speed. Chapter 118, Five Elements Sword Formation. That's the Burning Rainbow Sword. Burning Rainbow, senior sister, that's Burning Rainbow. Ancestor, please don't let my eyes see wrongly. Senior brother is still alive. Senior brother Tang Yan is indeed still alive. The four Shu Mountain sword cultivators standing in the air on their flying artifacts were also shocked when they saw the flying sword suddenly appear. However, they were immediately overjoyed. Because of their experiences together, they were too familiar with that sword light. They recognized it at a glance. The three junior brothers looked at the water attribute senior sister, who was the only one who did not speak. They saw that she was covering her mouth with one hand and tears were already flowing down her face. At this moment, Jiang Li's clone's voice sounded from below, "Focus your mind. Five elements sword formation." Standing on the tree branch, he was also speechless. He had no choice but to remind them. At the beginning, the sword formation had been fine, but after the flying swords rose into the air, it suddenly became chaotic. Forget about the power of such a sword formation. It was already fortunate that the five flying swords did not collide with each other. When the four people above heard the command of the clone, they also felt the same as when the five of them were together. They suppressed the excitement in their hearts and controlled their flying swords to return to the correct place. At this moment, the flying sword that carried a red stream of light finally arrived. It stabbed into the sword formation from behind, and the five elements returned to their positions. Immediately, fire fueled earth, earth fueled metal, metal fueled water, water fueled wood, and wood fueled fire. The five elements rotated and coexisted. The might of the sword formation suddenly increased. With an invincible might, it charged at the golden-winged condor. Shrika. When the condor saw the sudden change in front of it, its soul almost dissipated in shock. With its intelligence, it was difficult to understand why the power of the toothpicks would rise exponentially, with just 4 toothpicks becoming 5. The huge condor beat its wings frantically, trying to escape in the opposite direction. The violent flapping caused many of its precious feathers to fall, but it was still useless. Under the guidance of the most dazzling fire-type flying sword, the 5-element sword formation instantly struck golden-winged mystic condor. Swoosha. The power of the 5 elements cycle poured into the condor without holding back. The hard feathers did not even have a chance to resist before they were completely destroyed. Then the flesh, bones, and internal organs. With just one strike, the insufferably arrogant golden-winged condor perished on the spot. This was the power of the Shu Mountain 5-element sword formation. Back then in the Mother River, even the Golden Core zombie demon did not dare to withstand this sword formation. How could a mere condor have such ability? A moment later, the 5 flying swords passed through its body. After bending in the air, they returned to their masters. The only thing left behind was the corpse of the condor, which was still being ravaged by the 5-element sword chi. This time, the attack was a little heavy. When the 5-element sword chi dissipated, there would probably be nothing good left on this huge bird. Senior brother Tang Yan. Jiang Li had just recalled Burning Rainbow when such a sound came from above. It was as if he had been stimulated by something familiar. In the brain of this body, countless memory fragments were quickly piecing together, and his consciousness was recalling more and more of his predecessor's memories. He held his head and stood motionless, trying to digest the incomplete memories. Soon, the 4 Shu Mountain Sword cultivators flew to his side and surrounded Jiang Li, shouting non-stop. Their faces were filled with excitement. "Senior brother, it's really you." The female cultivator with black hair, mixed with wisps of ice blue, walked up to him. The female cultivator lowered her head and looked up at him. Her eyes were filled with tears and she looked pitiful. Seeing this familiar face, more memories surfaced in his mind, causing him to frown. The female cultivator looked at the clone's neck again, and tears immediately rolled down her face. On the neck of the clone, the scar left behind by the Golden Core zombie demon was still clearly visible. "I'm sorry, senior brother, if I hadn't given up on finding you, perhaps." Junior sister Shuang Meng, the clone, interrupted the other party's self-reproach. Jiang Li did not know about the others, but after the Battle of the Mother River, the people from the Shu Mountain 5 Elements Peak were definitely the last to leave. It was said that they had been searching for more than half a month. For some reason, the clone, Tang Yan, stretched out his left hand and inserted his fingers into the other party's hair. However, junior sister Shuang Meng did not resist at all. Instead, she was different from her usual aloofness. She took the initiative to gently rub her head against the palm of Tang Yan's clone. From far away, Jiang Li's main body had a helpless expression as he no longer paid attention to the live broadcast over there. He temporarily cut off his main body's memories of his clone, allowing his clone to perfectly act as Tang Yan. However, he did not expect that one day he would actually have to witness his own clone flirting. Was he not handsome enough? Why had he never met a junior sister who took the initiative to throw herself at him? That did not seem right. When he returned to the outer sect last time, he had also received quite a number of love letters. Oh, that's right, that was a thing. There should be no problem with his clone for the time being. His identity could withstand inspection. Once he returned to the Shu Mountain 5 Elements Peak, he would see if he could learn some powerful cultivation methods, and Jiang Li would be able to easily learn them from afar. If the situation was appropriate, he could reveal a little more about the spiritual root seed so that the cultivation world of the Great Mountain region would be prepared for any possible plots. Jiang Li's hopes for this clone were basically fulfilled. The clone and his junior sister exchanged pleasantries before leaving. After they left, Jiang Li's figure shuttled through the forest and arrived here. He took out the sect map, and after carefully identifying the direction, he drew 2 straight lines on the map. The first line was the route the previous male bird took after capturing the clone to return to the nest. The second line was the route that the female bird guarding the nest took after discovering the 4-sword cultivators. The 2 straight lines stretched out and crossed each other, pointing out a location on the map. Good, it was not far from here. Jiang Li looked towards a certain direction in the forest. He put away the map, and his figure flashed as he quickly ran towards the target location. About 4 hours later, Jiang Li arrived at the area indicated by the intersection of the 2 lines. Although on the map, it was only a point where the 2 points crossed, in the vast cultivation world, it was still a considerable area. However, it might be harder to find another animal's nest, but a bird's nest was a different story. Jiang Li turned around in the jungle in the region. Soon, he found what he wanted to see. A particularly large pile of bird feces. Yes, it was really a big one. One look and one would not be able to eat for 2 days. The golden-winged condors lived together as a female and a male. With their strength, they were considered a small tyrant in this mountain forest. Powerful demon beasts were not permitted around them, much less large birds. Therefore, the ones who left this thing behind must be the 2 condors. Jiang Li continued to search. The bird manure appeared more and more frequently and densely. Soon, it was all over the ground and trees. The environment on the ground was terrible. Jiang Li's eyes lit up. In the center of the bird manure, there were a few ancient trees that were especially huge. Jiang Li controlled the dragon imprisoning lock to rise into the sky. Finally, in the middle of the 3 huge ancient trees, he discovered a bird nest that was also enlarged by hundreds of times of a normal nest. In the middle of the nest, 2 huge eggs that were half the height of a human lay quietly. He had finally found it. Chapter 119, Dragon Tortoise. A few days later. Boom! On a calm lake, a water splash that was a few meters high suddenly exploded. Jiang Li's figure that was covered in a wooden armor leaped out from within, and then he stepped on the surface of the water and flew towards the shore. As he walked on the water, an enormous tentacle suddenly stretched out from beneath the surface of the water and swept towards Jiang Li. However, Jiang Li seemed to have made preparations beforehand, and he dodged it with a few flashes under the enhancement of the armored horse divine travel. After landing on the shore and retreating to a safe distance, the black tentacle seemed to have reached its limit and stopped pursuing. It swayed twice before sinking back into the water. However, the end of the tentacle was especially round, as if there was a part missing. Seeing that the water surface no longer moved, Jiang Li stretched out his hand and gestured towards the surface of the lake. Splash! A black chain shot out of the lake. The dragon imprisoning lock automatically became thinner and shorter, wrapping around Jiang Li's waist. Slam! A black tentacle that was 3 meters long and as thick as a bucket landed in front of Jiang Li and was still wriggling non-stop. This thing was obviously the tail section of the tentacle that attacked Jiang Li earlier. Jiang Li sighed. Spiritual qi brushed past his entire body, and the lake water on his body dispersed into a mist that was quickly blown dry. This thing is really hard to deal with in the water. Jiang Li looked at the lake nearby and could not help but sigh. After finding the 2 eggs, he flew all the way here and had already stayed by the lake for 3 days. This was all because he had taken a fancy to a demon beast in the water. Name: Dragon Tortoise. Type: Water Demon Beast. Age: Sexual immaturity. Gender: Male. Source of nutrition: Omnivorous. Status: Ambush and strangle. Danger level: High. This was a type of aquatic demon beast that was recorded in the scripture Storage Valley's beast record. It was said that it inherited the powerful bloodline of the ancient dragon race. Although it was still a minor, the body was already as huge as a water monster. It had a dragon head, a tortoise body, and a snake tail. It was said that its appearance was very similar to the legendary divine beast, Black Tortoise. There were even rumors that this dragon tortoise was a variation born after a night of intercourse by the amorous dragon race and the divine beast, Black Tortoise. When Jiang Li arrived at this lake the day before, he discovered that the scenery here was beautiful and the surface of the lake was like a mirror. As such, he decided to rest here for the night. Moreover, as this place was already not far from the sect, he chose to camp and start a fire after relaxing a little. He even took out a huge beast leg and roasted it on the fire. If he continued forward, he would only need 2 days to return to the sect. However, along the way, he did not encounter any demon beasts that he liked, and he had yet to obtain the material for the beast blood tattoo. There was a reason why this beast leg was roasted. He wanted to attract some powerful demon beasts to fall into the trap. However, after waiting for a while, although there were indeed some demon beasts that were attracted by the fragrance, the strange thing was that those demon beasts did not seem to have much courage. They only stood at the edge of the forest from afar and watched, and for a long time, no one dared to go forward and snatch it. Jiang Li's aura was only at the Qi refinement realm. In theory, it should be an existence that was inclined towards the bottom of the food chain in this forest. It should not be enough to deter so many demon beasts from approaching. Could it be that they did not dare to approach the lake? Jiang Li suddenly discovered a problem. The lake in the wilderness where animals were densely packed should be the water source for a large number of animals. Every day, tens of thousands of animals would come here to drink water. How could the environment here still be so intact? Unless this lake was not a safe water source. Just as Jiang Li thought of this, he suddenly felt a chill down his spine. A tail as thick as a water bucket silently extended from the river. Jiang Li only felt his waist tighten, and he was swept up together with the roasted meat that was crazily dripping oil on the fire. Immediately, he felt a severe weightlessness. Without giving him any time to react, the pitch-black and slippery tail dragged him into the water. The sudden coldness of the water and the large number of bubbles in front of Jiang Li made him unable to react for a moment. Then a gaping maw clamped down on his head. Sharp teeth slashed at his neck as if seeking to rip it off. If not for the black armament covering him in time, he would have joined the headless zombie club. A stench entered his nose. The tail that was as thick as a water bucket wrapped tighter and tighter around his body, squeezing crazily. The thing that swept him into the water was extremely powerful. The tail that was as thick as a water bucket wrapped around his entire body, causing his bones to creak. This hunting pattern was very similar to that of some giant snakes. However, after throwing the appraisal skill at the bloody mouth, he did indeed obtain information about the dragon tortoise. It was clearly still underage, but the danger level to Jiang Li had already reached a high level. It was almost the same level of danger as senior sister Liu Mulan. His head was completely covered by the dragon's bite, so he tried to bring his heavy fists down on the tail. However, because he was underwater, Jiang Li had nowhere to exert his strength. All the joints in his body were wrapped up by the snake's tail, so he was unable to exert any brute force. Coupled with the dragon tortoise's astonishing defense and the layer of slippery mucus covering its skin, 50–60% of the force would slide away. The effect of his counterattack was minimal. As the dragon tortoise's tail tightened, Jiang Li also began to feel suffocation and pain. Was he going to die at the hands of a tortoise? No, absolutely not. If that was the case, he would definitely feel extremely aggrieved. After forcefully stabilizing his mind, Jiang Li had a thought and severed the high-grade spiritual qi flow to his clone and the 2 artifacts. The 50 points of high-grade spiritual qi per second immediately stayed in his body. It kept surging and churning, causing his body to immediately swell. Pew! Jiang Li circulated the cultivation method. A moment later, he suddenly opened his mouth and spat out a large amount of cold yin attribute spiritual qi. This was a spell technique that Jiang Li had learned earlier. Yin Wind Art. He had used it when he had been tested by senior sister Liu Mulan in the Demon Vanquishing Hall. Although its power was limited, it was great because it did not need him to chant or form seals. It was impossible to guard against. At least it was better than spitting saliva. Under the continuous expenditure of spiritual qi in his body, this power might not necessarily be weaker. He was not stingy with the expenditure of high-grade spiritual qi. He converted all the spiritual qi that surged into yin qi and blew at the dragon tortoise's throat. He gained 50 points of high-grade spiritual qi per second. How astonishing would the yin qi that it transformed into be? The dragon tortoise's throat swelled up instantly. The bright red flesh on the inner wall of the esophagus quickly turned black and dark under the erosion of the yin qi. If this continued, the flesh and blood would rot and die under the yin qi. Chapter 120, Unfair Battle. Under the extravagant usage of yin wind art, the dragon tortoise only lasted for 5 seconds before it retracted its head, as if it had been electrocuted. The cold wind blew directly at the throat, attacking the vital part of the dragon tortoise. It was in so much pain that its head shrank back. However, the majestic dragon head was too big, and no matter how hard it tried, it could not pull back into the tortoise shell. It could not be bothered to hunt Jiang Li anymore. After letting go of Jiang Li, its long tail slapped the water a few times, and like a water dragon, it quickly disappeared into the depths of the lake. At that speed, the dragon imprisoning lock could not even catch up to his opponent's tail qi. This was the first time Jiang Li met this dragon tortoise, both sides suffering a bit. Then, Jiang Li developed a strong interest in this water demon beast. The terrifying strangulation force definitely far exceeded that of other demon beasts of the same level. Jiang Li had also caught a glimpse of the dragon head underwater. Perhaps this fellow really did possess the bloodline of the ancient dragons. Moreover, Jiang Li indeed had a severe shortcoming in underwater combat. If he could obtain its blood essence, perhaps he could make up for it a lot. Therefore, Jiang Li had already set this dragon tortoise as the material for his 4th beast blood tattoo. In the next 3 days, Jiang Li took the initiative to attack. He lured it onto the shore and provoked it while in the lake. He had several great battles with the dragon tortoise. However, in the water, this demon beast was extremely strong and agile. He was at a disadvantage every time he fought it. The only time was when he used himself as bait to set up a trap in advance. It was not easy for him to finally use the dragon imprisoning lock to tie up his opponent's tail. However, he did not expect that the dragon tortoise would actually have the ability to escape by cutting off its tail, causing Jiang Li's plan to fail again. Jiang Li had a headache about this. He wanted to use the dragon tortoise's blood essence to make up for his weakness in underwater combat. However, if he did not make up for his shortcomings in underwater combat, he would not be able to defeat the dragon tortoise. As such, Jiang Li fell into an awkward stalemate. If only there was a way he could make it leave the water. Jiang Li looked at the broken tail in front of him and fell into deep thought. He had tried using bait several times, but it had been proven to be a failure. He had nearly lost an egg of the golden-winged condor in the process. In that case, don't blame me. Jiang Li was determined to kill that dragon tortoise. After 3 days of fighting, he discovered that if he did not use some crafty methods, it would probably be very difficult to win. In the mountains, I can set fire to the trees. In the water, I can use poison. He took out the coffin and threw it out. The coffin expanded in the wind. As it grew larger, it flew higher and higher until it was 100 meters high in the center of the lake. Yin corpse blood release. The coffin lid slid to the side, and immediately a stream of red-black liquid poured out. It was the yin corpse blood that could fill a medium-sized pool in the coffin. This yin corpse blood was incomparably sinister and poisonous. When it entered the lake water, it immediately dyed the blue lake water into a rich red-black color, and it quickly spread towards the surroundings. On the surface of the lake, large numbers of dead fish quickly floated up. This scene was practically a replica of the Mother River. The area of this lake was not very large, so it should be unable to cleanse such a large amount of yin corpse blood. This dragon tortoise was not an evil thing. Jiang Li did not believe that it could still stay in the water. Sure enough, not long after, a long-bearded dragon head surfaced for the first time. If not for the fact that Jiang Li had seen its true form underwater, he would have probably been frightened by the majestic dragon head and fled 1,000 miles away. Roar! With a roar, a thick column of water shot out from the dragon's head. It ignored the gravitational force and shot straight at the coffin that was still pouring out yin corpse blood. However, how could Jiang Li watch as his artifact got attacked? The chain in his hand immediately flew out. After a long period of refinement by high-grade spiritual qi, the various aspects of the dragon imprisoning lock were already very powerful. In just a moment, it caught up to the water pillar. With a swooshing sound, the dragon imprisoning lock wrapped around the water column before suddenly tightening. The thick water column was bound by the chains and dissipated in mid-air. Roar! After all, the dragon tortoise had such a huge head. Its brain capacity was clearly not what ordinary tortoises could compare to. It was obviously much smarter. It turned its head along the direction of the dragon imprisoning lock and saw Jiang Li, the culprit who had thrown the poison. Its instincts told it that, as an aquatic demon beast, leaving the comfortable water to go ashore was not a good idea. But the red-black blood spreading from the center of the lake made it understand that this lake, which it considered home, was going to be ruined. In the end, anger overcame the demon beast's already low intelligence. A long tail stirred the lake water and finally climbed up to the shore under Jiang Li's expectant gaze. This dragon tortoise was nearly 50 meters in length. Its tail was long and strong. Just its tail alone took up 40 meters of length. Behind the sinister dragon head was a slightly strange tortoise shell. This was strange because other than the head and tail, this dragon tortoise shell only had 2 holes. This was because a normal tortoise had 4 legs, while this dragon tortoise only had 2 front legs supporting it on the ground. Behind it, it relied on the powerful snake tail. Jiang Li was slightly curious now. This fellow's head was so big and its tail was so long. Obviously, it was impossible to withdraw its head and body back into its shell. Then what was the meaning of this tortoise shell? Was it for fun? Swoosh! At this moment, the dragon imprisoning lock flew back like a pitch-black bolt of lightning. With 2 cracking sounds, the shackles on the 2 ends of the chain held onto the front claws of the dragon tortoise while holding onto Jiang Li's left leg. The man and the beast were tied together. Jiang Li could not help but smile. This is the way he liked to fight. Roar! The dragon tortoise relied on its snake tail to move at an astonishing speed, even after leaving the lake. Raising its huge dragon head and 2 beast claws, it roared and rushed towards Jiang Li. On the other hand, Jiang Li was not afraid in the slightest. His thick shoulders sank as he ran, and the mountain-crushing ape demon that had been tempered 1,000 times ruthlessly smashed towards the dragon tortoise. Boom! Jiang Li's cannonball-like figure collided with the dragon tortoise's shell and sent it flying. On land, not to mention possessing dragon blood, even a true dragon. All right, he could not beat a true dragon, but bullying a dragon tortoise with a thin bloodline was not a problem. In the water, Jiang Li was not as strong as the dragon tortoise, but at this moment, the situation had completely reversed. After he collided with the dragon tortoise, he pressed down on its head and beat it up. Hard scales flew everywhere like snow in the air. The long snake tail swept over, wishing to entangle and strangle Jiang Li. However, he quickly retreated, not giving the slightest chance. If this dragon tortoise wanted to return to the water, Jiang Li would nail it on the spot again, using his extremely powerful strength to pull it, making it exhaust a large amount of stamina in vain. A dragon had its reverse scale, while snakes were weakest 7 inches below its head. This dragon tortoise had dragon blood and a long snake tail. Logically speaking, it definitely had such vital parts. However, the tortoise shell that Jiang Li thought was useless at the beginning just happened to protect its vital parts, causing the weakness to become the hardest part of its body. He could not end this quickly. Jiang Li had no choice but to enter a prolonged battle of attrition with this dragon tortoise. His skin was dyed black as he battled the dragon tortoise, exchanging injuries and spewing blood. However, in terms of stamina and recovery, Jiang Li was really not afraid of anyone. It was rare for him to suffer such injuries, and he was able to recover from them easily as if he was breathing. It was as if there were two female cultivators from the rejuvenation hall behind Jiang Li who were constantly using recovery techniques. Ever since the situation had dragged into a protracted battle, the battle had become unfair. A few hours later, Jiang Li stepped on the huge dragon's head while panting slightly. The dragon tortoise had finally exhausted all of its strength, and it lay on the ground while on the verge of death. Jiang Li stuffed it into the coffin, wrapped the chain around his waist, and flew towards the sect that was not far away.